Good evening, everybody. It's now 7 p.m. Welcome to the meeting of Overview and Scrutiny Call-in Subcommittee. My name is Councillor Sayar Raza, Chair of Houndslay's Overview and Scrutiny Committee and Chair of this subcommittee. I'm joined tonight by 4 other members of the Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Joanna Bidoff, Councillor Richard Foote, Councillor Laura Perisotto, and Councillor Marina Sharma. I would like to also welcome the subcommittee guests, Councillor Catherine Dunn, Deputy Leader of the Council and Cabinet Member of Climate, Environment and Transport, and Councillor Peter Thompson, who has called in one of Councillor Dunn's decisions. Welcome also to the other council members who are in attendance, as well as officers who will be assisting us throughout the meeting, and of course the members of the public who are watching this meeting at home or here in House of House. The subcommittee will consider a call-in of the Cabinet decision published on the 8th of September 2023, entitled Cycle 9 Chiswick High Road, Acton Lane and Heathfield Terrace to Goldhawk Road, 2022-23 Experimental Traffic Management Order. This subcommittee is not the owner of the call-in request, and so are not advocating on behalf or against it. We are here to review it and the Cabinet report. We are here to express our opinions on the merits or otherwise of the call-in and try to come to a collective view, or failing that, a majority view. I would like to remind members that a review of the call-in request should not itself be adversarial in nature. I expect the business of a subcommittee to be carried out with courtesy and respect, and anyone in this room who is unable to meet these expectations, I'll ask them to reconsider their behaviour. If they continue to behave discourteously, I'll ask them to leave. I would invite both Councillor Dunn and Councillor Thompson to address the subcommittee tonight. Councillor Peter Thompson will explain the reasons for the calling in the Cabinet decision. Councillor Catherine Dunn, as a relevant Cabinet member for the Cabinet decision, will explain why she thinks the Cabinet decision was reasonable and respond to the calling report. Given that a significant element of Councillor Thompson's calling relates to TfL data, I've also asked John Foucher from Transport for London to attend. If we have specific technical questions in relating to data, we can also look to him for clarification. This meeting has been called under the constitutional arrangements for calling, which requires meeting of subcommittee to take place within 7 days of the council receiving the notification of a valid calling request. On this occasion, to meet these requirements, it has not been possible for the agenda to be published in accordance with usual access to information requirements. However, I confirm now that as chair, I accept the agenda papers as urgent, which means we can proceed. The calling subcommittee will be asked to consider a calling request made by 8 council members about a cabinet decision published on the 8th of September 2023, entitled Cycle 9 Chiswick High Road, Acton Lane, Heathfield Terrace to Goldhawk Road, 2022-23, Experimental Traffic Management Order. Members will note from the cover report published on Friday of last week that having received a call in, the subcommittee is asked to come to one of the following conclusions: that the challenge to the decision should be taken no further, meaning that the decision may be implemented, that the matter should be referred back to Cabinet. In such cases, the calling subcommittee must set out the nature of its concerns for the decision taker executive, that the decision is contrary to the policy framework or contrary to or not wholly in accordance with the budget framework and should therefore be referred to the council. In such a case, the calling subcommittee must set out the nature of its concerns for council. The procedure that will follow tonight is based on terms of reference for the subcommittee as set out in the council's constitution. I'll explain it to everyone now. The process tonight is in 2 stages. First, we will consider the decision and reasons for the calling request to see if it agrees with all or part of it or none of it. Secondly, depending on the outcome of the first stage, we will then move on to discussion with recommendations for changes, if any, we wish to refer back to Cabinet or Council to consider. We shall do this in the following way. We should start first stage by asking Councillor Thompson to speak up for 5 minutes to introduce the calling request and his reasons for it. I shall then ask Councillor Dunn, as a relevant Cabinet member, also to speak up for 5 minutes to explain why they think the original decision was reasonable and why the calling should not be upheld in part or in full. I will then invite members of the subcommittee to ask questions of clarification to two councillors. I'll repeat, these questions should points of clarification, not questions designed to open up a wider debate. I will then ask each member of the subcommittee in turn to speak up to 5 minutes on the first question, which is to see if we agree with all part of it or none of the calling request. Note this is focused on Councillor Thompson's calling, not wider issues. I shall then briefly sum up to see if we have any partial or whole consensus. I will then propose a motion confirming if the subcommittee wishes to agree all the calling requests, part of the calling request, or if so, which elements or none of the request. I will seek a seconder for that motion, and the members of the subcommittee will vote on it. If the decision is not in agree with any part of the calling request, we will move on to the next agenda items, as we will not be making any reference to the Cabinet. This concludes the first stage. If we have decided that we agreed with all or part of the calling request, we'll move to the second part of the process, which is to decide what we wish to recommend to Cabinet. I intend to do this in a similar way, which is to ask each of the members of the subcommittee in turn to speak up to 5 minutes with their views on what should be in those recommendations. I, as chair, will speak last. I shall then briefly sum up to see if we have any partial or whole consensus. I will then propose a motion based on this, confirming what the subcommittee wishes to refer to the Cabinet to consider. I will seek to seconder for that motion, and the members of the subcommittee will vote on it. And that is the process for dealing with calling requests. We move on to agenda item number 1. Apologies for absence, declaration of interest and other communications from members. Firstly, I can see that we have all 5 members of the subcommittee present, so this is quorum, and a meeting can proceed. Are there any declarations of interest or other communications? I'll refer you to the guidance note from the Council's monitoring officer, including in your agenda.
Sorry, Chair, I think we've all received emails from residents with regards to this over the last couple of days.
Thank you.
I need to say that this is partly in my ward, so clearly I have a local interest. And in addition to the emails that we've all had, I have been lobbied nearly every day in the road, as I am most days, about the cycle lane in Chiswick. So that is the context that I bring this in.
Thank you for that. We now move on to agenda item number 2. So this is the calling report, Cabinet decision, Cycleway 9, Chiswick High Road, Acton Lane and Heathfield Terrace to Goldhawk Road, 2022-23 experimental traffic management order, which was on the 5th of September 2023. We now move on to agenda item 2, which is the main item on the agenda for this evening, the calling request relating to the recent Cabinet decision, Cycleway 9, Chiswick High Road, Acton Lane, Heathfield Terrace to Goldhawk Road, 2022-23 experimental traffic management order. I will begin by reminding all members that the constitution provides 6 grounds for calling in a decision: inadequate consultation with stakeholders prior to the decision, the absence of adequate evidence on which to base a decision, the decision is contrary to the policy framework or contrary to or not wholly in accordance with the budget framework, the action is not proportionate to the desired outcome, a potential human rights challenge, insufficient consideration of legal and financial advice. Councillor Thompson has called in this decision based on 3 of these grounds: the absence of adequate evidence on which to base a decision, the action is not proportionate to the desired outcome, and a potential human rights challenge. May I ask members to bear this in mind in the following discussions, as if any part of calling does not meet these criteria, you cannot support the element of it. Also, as we are here to consider Councillor Thompson's call-in, can we please limit ourselves to observations on the call-in? For each of these three elements, Councillor Thompson call-in provides additional detail and in some cases supplementary appendices. These are all contained in Appendix 1 of the cover report. I will start by inviting Councillor Thompson to introduce the call-in request and clarify reasons for submitting it. Councillor Thompson, the document is included in your agenda pack, so I would ask you to assume that we've all read it, and when you're introducing it, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members and fellow councillors. We've called this in because the claim we're making is we believe that the papers provided to Cabinet on which its decision was made contain considerable error and maybe even false or misleading information. The most misleading information, I would argue, concerns safety. And since I only have 5 minutes and I can't cover everything, I'm just going to address myself to that issue. In a sense, I think that assertion about the lack of evidence also applies to things like the cycle count, air pollution, bus times, and so on. We have to presume that the information was largely provided by Transport for London, yet ultimately Transport for London are not making this decision, Hounslow Council is, and therefore we have our necks on the block if something goes wrong. As it stands, Transport for London is asking Hounslow to approve a cycle scheme where cycle safety is materially worse than it was before it was built. If the council proceeds to approve this cycle lane, it will be knowingly or through negligence putting lives at risk, and in so doing creating significant legal risk for the borough. I think what I would recommend and urge colleagues to consider is whether we should be asking the Cabinet to extend the traffic order, which would also serve to give us a bit more leverage on Transport for London to sort out many of the problems on this cycle lane. If it becomes permanent, Transport for London, I'm afraid, will be gone. So just going through the focus on safety, in the Cabinet papers that were received in 5.4, the comment about road safety was that accidents have decreased. It says an increase during the construction periods, and it says this should be noted in the context of significant increases to cycle flows noted elsewhere in the report. However, the evidence from Transport for London does not prove that statement to be true. If you look at Transport for London data from 2017 to 2022, total accidents for 2020, 2021 and 2022 were much higher when Cycleway 9 was opened than in 2017, 18 and 19 when it was not. So to use the Transport for London terminology, accident rates are worse by 40%, 80% and 40%. And when you break that analysis down a little bit further and look at the annualized rates of accidents, which is the Transport for London metric, for each period when there was construction and when it was in operation and when it wasn't, it's clear that the rates of accidents have more than doubled, and serious accidents between 210% and 380% higher than before Cycle 9 existed. So that for us raises serious doubts as to the information and analysis provided by Transport for London to the London Borough of Hounslow and put forward in the Cabinet papers. The Cabinet papers claim that cycle accidents have increased because there is more cycling. The Cabinet paper claims a completely unbelievable increase in cycle kilometres of 47% in 2023. I think that number is just erroneous. The only reason we can see that sort of increase, and perhaps where it comes from, is that Transport for London have added an additional camera in 2023 that it did not use in 2022 or 2021. So in other words, we're not comparing like with like. So statistically, I think that's bunkum, and it's highly false and highly misleading. And ask yourselves, if cycling was up by 47% on Cycleway 9 on Chiswick High Road in 2023, why is it flat on the same cycleway when it gets to King Street in Hammersmith, where figures are also taken? Did all the cyclists get off and walk once they reached the borough boundaries? No, again, the data is false. If you use previous reliable data of cycle counts that wasn't included in the report, you would see there's been no particular growth in cycling in 2023. Now, Transport for London tried to overcome this problem by this average cycle kilometres metric. But as Transport for London have admitted in freedom of information requests, this is at best an estimate. And again, the claim, I would argue, of an increase in 2023 is significant. So it's self-evident to us that there's been an increase in accidents, and therefore the original Cabinet papers on which this decision were made are flawed. It doesn't represent a true picture. The Council, as we all know, has many statutory duties, and the Cabinet paper highlights 2 of those. But there is also a third duty that is a statutory duty on all councillors, and that's a duty under the Road Traffic Act 1988, section 39, which for some reason was not mentioned in the report.
5 minutes.
Cycle.
Peter,
Is that 5 minutes?
5 minutes. Very, very quickly.
Thanks,
Just
very
finish
quick.
off.
So the council does have that statutory duty to promote and improve road safety, and I think this does the opposite. The recommendations are before you, and the chair made those very clear. As I said, the recommendation I would support is that you took it back to Cabinet and perhaps ask them to extend the experimental traffic order so that Transport for London can address some of the issues in the scheme. At the end of the day, the lives and safety of all people who live, work and visit all parts of Hounslow and this borough and Chiswick are of the utmost importance to all of us, and that ultimately is why we called in this scheme. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Now I will ask Councillor Dunn to explain why she thinks the Cabinet decision was reasonable and respond to the Calling report. Councillor Dunn, you two have exactly the same amount as Councillor Thompson, about 6 minutes. After you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Chair. So to explain why we brought the decision and to address all the points in the call-in, the Council is committed to supporting a modal shift to active travel and to the use of public transport, and the delivery of Cycleway 9 is consistent with this strategic vision. This project is beneficial to the local community and the economy, reducing congestion and road casualties and improving air quality. This is in line with the Council's commitment to creating a healthier, greener borough. Cycleways have a positive impact on the environment, as well as both cyclist and pedestrian safety. Evidence from leading cycling cities supports cycle and motor vehicle segregation to address cyclist safety. Cycleway 9 is a high-quality cycle route that runs between Olympia and Brentford, and the Cabinet report sets out the objections and comments received in response to the experimental traffic order implemented on Chiswick High Road at Acton Lane and between Heathfield Terrace and Goldhawk Road in 2022 and 2023. During the trial period, the scheme was assessed against several traffic and environmental indices to ensure that the decision taken to make the order permanent is backed by the evidence and conforms to our transport and environmental policy objectives. Data shows that cycling has increased, with a 47% increase in cycling since 2021. Collisions along the route have decreased, and there is no material impact on bus performance or air quality, all of which are indications of the scheme working. Cycle kilometres travelled by people cycling on Chiswick High Road between March and June have been recorded each year in 2021, 22 and 23, and from 2021 to 23, there has been a 47% increase in the distance travelled by cyclists. It may take a little bit of getting your head around what that means, but it's a valid way of measuring, and I'm sure our TfL colleague will be happy to go into it in more detail if you need it. Further on the decision, noting the need for a robust equalities impact assessment, Council officers commissioned an independent equalities impact assessment which augments that which was undertaken by TfL. Looking at the outcome of the trial, there was an overall positive impact in 5 areas. Firstly, utilisation. There are more cyclists on the road. Second, road safety. There's been an overall reduction in collisions causing injuries. Thirdly, air quality. Pollutants, including NO2, PM10, PM2.5, have either decreased or stayed below EU limits. Fourthly, there are improved facilities for pedestrians, parking and for loading provisions. And fifthly, with regards to bus journey times, there's been a marginal reduction in journey times in both directions. There have been some neutral or marginally negative impacts, and these are increased traffic on side roads, but this is a mixed picture showing an increase in some streets, but with a reduction or no impact in others. There are a number of factors at play here, including works on the A4 and activities by utility companies. On the Equalities Impact Assessment, the impact is rated as medium, but we think that with complementary measures, that can be reduced to low or neutral thresholds. And then finally, traffic in Chiswick High Road. There is a marginal increase in the overall traffic times. However, this needs to be viewed in the context of works, including, as mentioned, activities by utility companies in the area, which impacted on the local road network. By approving the scheme, we are potentially able to enable the implementation of a further set of improvements, including the removal of a bus gate at Acton Lane and additional infrastructure improvement at junctions to strengthen safety and smooth traffic on the road. So in conclusion, considering the evidence gathered during the trial, the scheme's alignment with the council's and the mayor's transport objectives and its potential for further improvements, as previously mentioned, Cycleway 9 on Chiswick High Road is a major success story, and the council's cabinet was and remains content to make the ETMO permanent. To address issues around safety, as I mentioned at the cabinet report, I am confident in the data provided by TfL, and I will say the majority of cyclists I've spoken to want to keep Cycleway 9 permanent. I'm going to read out some words of a woman who wrote to me. She said, "Cycleway 9 has changed my life and the life of my family. I'm a mum of 3 children living off the Chiswick High Road who had not ridden a bike since childhood until C9 was built. I am now able and confident enough to cycle my eldest 2 children safely to and from school every day. Thanks to C9, we never use our car for the school run anymore, and my children are able to get exercise before and after school. Not only do we use C9 for the school run, but also for all the children's other activities in and around Chiswick. We've invested in a bike that I will now feel confident in riding with our infant daughter in the child seat on the back. This means that as our family grows, we will all be able to continue to ride safely together and use C9 daily."
Thank you. That's 6 minutes.
Thank you. It feels like an attack on cyclists when people asked. He went over.
Okay.
Oh, well,
So-
he chose to go over. So I can go over.
Councillor Biddle. Okay, so now we
Different
move.
rules for different people, is it?
We now move to. We now move to the questions to Councillor Thompson and Councillor Dunn. May I ask members to ensure that your questions relate specific to the calling report, which is the matter we are considering this evening. Our guests may find it helpful if you explain which parts of the call-in you're asking your questions about when you ask. Remember also that these are questions of clarification on what Councillor Thompson and Councillor Dunn have said. If members have questions of technical nature, these may be answered by John Felcher of TfL. Committee members. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious about what was said about the data going flat on King Street. Does TfL have any explanation for how that is measured?
That's not backed up in TfL's data. So TfL undertakes several different counts on both Chiswick High Road and King Street, but our data for King Street shows an increase in cycling. That was presented to the Hammersmith and Fulham Cabinet when they took their decision to make the King Street scheme permanent. I don't have all the figures in front of me, but to give you an example, we saw an 83% increase in cycling on King Street between 2017 and 2022. So the numbers, absolute numbers, were 1,531 to 2,831, which is an 83% increase in cycling.
Thank you for that.
One of the interests is in improving cycling for communities that are not necessarily confident and have been using it for a long time. I would be curious to see if there is any information on any potential increase or of different communities using it, including, you know, gender, race, etc.
So TfL hasn't undertaken this analysis specifically for Chiswick High Road, but Transport for London does a lot of customer research. And what that research shows is that the groups you referred to, you know, women, ethnic minorities, older people, there's a much greater desire for them to have protected and segregated facilities. And that is one of the key reasons why Transport for London has been introducing more protected cycle lanes to make cycling more diverse and more representative of the whole of London. But I don't know if Hounslow want to comment on any other data they have.
Not data, but we obviously have the Cycle Sisters Hounslow group within our borough, which is a hugely successful group set up by and for Muslim women to cycle. They are hugely appreciative of Cycleway 9 and do use it and feel safe on it.
Just to add, excuse me. Thanks for the question, Councillor. I think it's well documented that those who are from ethnic minority backgrounds are much better, much more likely to cycle if it's segregated, because they do have fears and concerns about cycling generally. So if you can have some protection, they are much more likely to cycle.
Can I just say, the questions just to do with the calling, please, not to deviate, please. Councillor Biddulph.
Was that point deviation then? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we should stick to the calling.
So that point was deviation?
No, we don't need to know about diversity because that's not part of the calling.
Protected characteristics, equalities, legal challenge. It's part of the call-in.
Ask the question, please.
You said it was well documented, Jefferson, but what is that well documented evidence? What can you cite for me, please?
I'm not a diversity expert, but it is well documented that those who come from ethnic minority backgrounds are more likely to cycle if it is protected. So
what is, can you give us some, if you're not qualified to say that, you shouldn't really assert it. It's an assertion, I think.
So just
publicly available.
Yeah, so TfL has published extensive research on this. There's a report called Attitudes to Cycling, which covers this in depth, and I'm more happy to share that with members of the Cabinet tonight. Thank
you. I'm concerned because it doesn't seem to take into account people who don't cycle and who can't cycle. For example, did you consult, has anybody on that side consulted the National Federation of the Blind of the UK, which is a locally present charity living just over the boundary with Hammersmith, and our local branch of Age Concern?
Yes, we consulted quite widely. We received a number of responses from various groups. And just to add, whilst I take your point around consulting with local blind associations, the Royal National Institute of the Blind worked with TfL in designing the bus bypasses and the bus shelters that they have. They've put in place on Chiswick High Road. So they're actually fed into the design standards that we currently use.
Sorry, Chair, I have to correct that because the RNIB actually has on its website that it is against some of the measures in here, for example, bus stop bypasses, for example. And the point is that I know you consult national organisations, but my point is consulting local organisations who have local experience, day-to-day experience of being in Chiswick and being beside the cycle lane and having the effects of that cycle lane. So I think what you're saying to me is that you did not consult the National Federation of the Blind of the UK, which is local, and you did not consult Age Concern. Is that right? Local Age Concern.
Let me just make sure that I give you correct information. I'll quickly check the list of consultees. But the consultation was very wide, and we had about over 5,000 responses. But I can confirm. Let me come back to you as to specifically whether we consulted that particular group.
The list is there and they're not on it. I've seen the list,
Yeah.
but they're not on it. So the answer, I think you're all trying to not say, is no, you haven't consulted the 2 local organisations who represent people with protected characteristics. And we know we are at risk of a legal challenge on human rights here.
I think they would have all been given the opportunity to, certainly, yes.
I know they haven't. They have not. They're not on
They
your
didn't
list.
they didn't know about the consultation. Is
They
that what
did
you're
not know
saying?
about your lists. They weren't
What do you mean?
approached as didn't know about your they're not on your lists of people who've been consulted. They've written in randomly, but I'm saying that's not good enough, is it? We've got local organisations with local intelligence who ought to be consulted about local issues.
I think just because they didn't choose to respond to the consultation.
They weren't invited in the same way as the national organisations were. If you don't understand that simple difference between actively inviting a national organisation and actively not inviting a local organisation, then we're in trouble across all the consultations that we run.
So just to come back on that, I think John will have something to say about the engagement with national organisations that have shaped the TfL guidance. I think what we're saying is that because we've put it in as an experimental traffic order, there was ample opportunity for anybody who had an opinion or to express a view on Cycleway 9 to do so. And we had over 5,000 responses to that. I understand your point, Councillor Biddulph. Did we invite them in to sit down and have a conversation? I think Jefferson's saying no, he's checking his list. But that doesn't mean that they haven't had the opportunity to respond and feed back. And I think
That was my question, though. That was not my question. We've all got the chance to keep check on things and respond, but it's an active point.
I know that we do. So we do write to local organisations for any kind of consultation. So they would have had the opportunity.
They are not on your lists.
But because they didn't respond.
No, they weren't invited officially because they're not on your lists. Let's not prolong this.
Okay, let's not.
I think
Can
you're
we move on to
confusing what I
another
mean,
question?
Councillor Biddulph.
Or you are.
They would have been notified.
Any other subcommittee members?
Thank you. On the point of safety and general use of the cycleway, there's the question here of the average increase per year and potential collisions. Were these numbers analysed during times where there were works being carried out? So, and would that have an effect on the numbers, either positively or negatively?
Simple answer, yes. We've done extensive collision analysis on Chiswick High Road from 2018 to the current time, and we've presented to Hounslow Council details of exactly what's been happening in those different time periods. But I think what's helpful tonight is if I just really simplify what the key issues are, because during construction, there's different things going on. So, for example, the cycle track would have been closed, so cyclists would have been in the road at more risk. We had a lot of works with the A4, which would have an impact as well. So I think there's only one. Well, there's two key periods to think about when you're looking at the collision data. One is before anything went in, and the other one is when everything is in and operating as it was, intended to do by Transport for London designers and also Hounslow Council designers. So I'll quickly just summarise you the data, because I think there is some confusion about the data, and I accept that. So I think it's helpful just to clarify. And as people probably are aware, the scheme in Chiswick High Road was implemented in 2 phases. The first phase is sometimes called 3A, and that is between Chiswick Lane and Goldhawk Road. Since the upgrades in this section were completed, there has been only one cycling collision within that section of the route in 11 months of data. So that's July 22 to June 23. In that same time period, there's been no pedestrian collisions in that section. And the total number of collisions, so it's involving all different modes on the road, there's been 1 collision. In comparison, in 2018, there were 9 collisions involving all modes. The data, therefore, for 3A provides a strong indication that the changes between Chiswick Lane and Goldhawk Road have provided a significant road safety benefit. The second section of the route between Heathfield Terrace and Chiswick Lane, there's less data because that was delivered later and it was only completed in February 2023. But the emerging data is also promising. Since the upgrades were completed in this section, Heathfield Terrace to Chiswick Lane, there's been 1 cycling collision recorded in the section between February 23 and June 23. There have been no pedestrian collisions within this section within the same time period, and the total number of collisions involving all modes between Heathfield Terrace and Chiswick Lane is 2 collisions. In comparison, in the whole of 2018, there were 15 collisions involving all modes. This data provides a good indication that the changes are providing a good road safety benefit.
Thank you for that, John.
Okay, am I allowed to ask questions? I don't think I'm. Am I?
Yes, please.
I am. I'm a bit confused because obviously I'm looking at Transport for London data in front of me, and it's saying something quite different. And as you said, you kept talking about all collisions, and I'm looking at cycle collisions and serious cycle collisions. And again, the data I have, and it's not cobbled up together by me, it's from your website, and it was part of the papers that went to Cabinet, was saying that in 2018 that all cycle collisions were 5, 2019 5, 2020 before the scheme came in 4, and then we've highlighted on my spreadsheet, but again it's from your information, during the periods when the scheme was open and in operation, those 5 sorts of figures suddenly become 10 for one of the periods, and obviously work was going on in 3A, and then when 3A was active between July and October, it's up to 3 again, and so on. So again, I think what members are a bit I'm a bit confused, and I'm sure obviously because this all boils down, as we said when we discussed in Cabinet, it all boils down to interpretation of data. If I, trying to be an informed local resident who tries to get my head around these things, I'm looking at one set of information from you saying one thing, and now you're sat there and obviously you're here as the expert. I'm not quite sure what your role is in Transport for London. No one said that actually. If you don't mind telling me what the job description is, I'd be interested. Sorry, go on.
Well, I'm a lead sponsor for cycling and healthy street schemes within Transport for London.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
I think the key point here is
you understand my confusion and residents' confusion.
And I think the point is we have to compare apples with apples. And what I've done is very carefully explained what the assessment is to make it simple for everyone tonight. And what I've done is I've explained what the collision data was in 1 year before anything went in, and then in nearly 1 year in what was after, but specifically between the points where the upgrade was. If you start looking beyond that extremity, so if you start looking beyond 3A when that was built, you're going to get a different answer. So you're comparing a different data set to what I've just explained. But accept there's some confusion, but TfL stands behind the data that I've just set out tonight. We're not saying that the data you've got is, I think other people have kind of interpreted the data wrong using TfL's public dashboard, which is fine. But ultimately, what we have to remember is doing collision analysis is a technical field. And, people in the public are quite welcome to use our tools and work things out for themselves. But this work has to be done by a traffic engineer. This assessment's been done by traffic, TfL engineering. It's been checked and checked again. We've passed that on to, Hounslow Council's engineers who have also checked it. But as I said, I stand by the data. But I think there is confusion when people start looking at different data sets.
With permission, Chair, just to clarify the question around the National Federation of the Blind.
Very, very quickly.
They were consulted. They are on the list.
Okay, it's not in the list that I saw, but thank you very much.
Thank you for that. So we now move on to the first main part of our responsibility tonight.
We've still got questions, Chair. We're not allowed to carry on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. How does C9 meet our wider environmental goals as a council? It is. It's part of the policy.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously, as I mentioned at the start of my opening statement, we are committed to active travel, which generally includes cycling, walking, wheeling for those using wheelchairs. We're also committed to mode shift to public transport, but the benefits, the extra benefits of active travel are both health benefits for the user and also the wider environmental benefits. As you know, we declared a climate emergency as a council in 2019, and in the analysis that we did looking at the carbon emissions in the borough, when we look at the wider borough emissions, so not just those from the council itself, but from everyone in the borough, residents, businesses, and so on, transport is responsible for the largest proportion of carbon emissions. So it helps us on our journey towards that objective of reducing carbon emissions. Perhaps more pressingly, locally, it helps us to improve the air quality by reducing the number of vehicles on the road. But there, as I said, there are also those public health benefits to the users themselves.
Richard, please.
I mean, I've heard a lot of comments in opposition of cycleways. I haven't heard one word about whether or not the Conservative group are in any way in favour of any cycleways in Chiswick. Could you please amplify on that?
I'm not against the concept of cycle lanes. When the Mayor of London first brought this in, I was leader of the council. In 2009, I think the first initial plans came forward. I wasn't much leader of the council very much long after that, so my role sort of went away. I was a councillor just about again in 2017 when the consultation on this particular scheme started, so I fed into that, and then I stood down in 2018. I think whilst I was out of the council, I think the view of the Conservative group was very clear that cycleways were great and cycle lanes are good. I think we had a strong argument, other people didn't accept it, that the A4 was a more logical place to put one to get people in and out of London quickly. I think from sort of day one, there were serious misgivings about the nature of the cycle highway on Chiswick High Road, the bi-directional, both ways, taking up pavement, all the rest of it, the floating bus stops was not a thing anyone ever bought into. But I think my personal track record, and I was for those 4 years leader of the council, was very positive and supportive about cycling. I think most of my group do cycle. We're regular cyclists, but again, the issue really is this particular one. This is not an anti-cycle issue. It's about safety, and whether this actually is value for money. I think that's also a concern of us. And my argument has tried to be that the evidence that is before us, and I say I do struggle. I take a point about it, so sometimes struggling to get to the bottom of all the data, but there's plenty of evidence on both sides. So again, you mentioned, Councillor, about the evidence for the use, or the flattening use on the King Street bit. Well, again, okay, maybe not with Transport for London, but there is obviously one of those sort of camera things that is in place, and I know there are issues about that too. You know that as well as I do, and that simply records people who goes past, and that's where I'm getting this idea from, that nothing's particularly changed. Also, the other data that you haven't mentioned, obviously, the Transport for London have several ways of measuring usage. And one of them is to stand there for a period of time on one day and record the number of cyclists. And, if you look at that evidence, that's where I was getting the argument from, that nothing particularly, there's been no massive increase. I'm not going to ask you, I know I've got so much. Just one final point. I'm not going to get into the cycle kilometre issue, because that, again, I've struggled with that one so many times, and I've gone through that left, right, and centre. But the bottom line I'll take from that is it's a technical matrix that's often used, obviously, by traffic engineers. It's not actually, but it is an estimate. And I think, again, if you might be telling me I'm wrong in a second, I'm literally, for that, I'm reading the words from Freedom of Information request from Transport for London. So if I'm wrong, that's the reason why.
Would you like me to answer, Chair? Yeah. Yeah, I actually agree with you, Councillor, that the cycling kilometre metric is confusing, and it's difficult to explain. I'm not going to attempt to explain it tonight. I think people will probably thank me for that. But what I can do is explain what's behind that, and the numbers that I think people are more familiar. The cycle counts. Would that be helpful? Okay. Just bear with me 1 second. So from TfL's automatic cameras on Chiswick High Road, I'll just read out some data for you. In May 2022, there were 1,775 cyclists recorded on an average day in that month. Yes, that's an average figure. It's not the highest or the lowest. And the following year, May 2023, there were 2,328 on an average day. That represents an increase in 553 cyclists, or 31%. If we look at, I can give you more figures, but we see, interestingly, if you look at the 2023 versus the 2021 figure, you get 755 cyclists, which is 48% increase, which is very similar to the cycling kilometres figure. And that shouldn't be a surprise because they're based on the same data. It's just a different way of expressing it. So again, we stand by our data that shows there has been an increase in cycling in the short term as well as over a longer period.
Thank you. Councillor Sharma, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to, as Councillor Thompson is able to speak, I would just like to ask Councillor Thompson that in the actual cabinet meeting where this was agreed, I was watching at home, and I'm not going to quote you word for word, so please forgive me. But you said that you cycled using the scheme. You had a very pleasant cycle. I'm just curious as to why at that point in that meeting you didn't address this then.
I did say that because I think I literally had that nice cycle ride the day before, or the 2 days before the meeting. So yeah, it was pleasant. It was a nice sunny Sunday summer afternoon. I think I said in the meeting I went down to Wetherspoons and Hammersmith, and yeah, very pleasant. Within that meeting, though, I did also sort of go through the results of the consultation, where most people had concerns about it, thought it made things safe. Most people, bizarrely, I said in the meeting, it put some cyclists off using it. So there were lots of other arguments too. I think I said in the meeting that I personally, I've never proposed we go and rip it out, but I think I'm not confident, I suppose, and actually having now called it in and spent far too many hours trying to go through this documentation, I think I'm still getting my head around the data and whether there's enough sort of, whether I'm convinced that it is safe enough. Now, obviously, we're talking about a large amount here of public money. I'm interested that you've referred to the June 2023 data, because that's not in the report because it wasn't available. Has that been verified, Mr.? Because I know there's that time lag.
Are you talking about
between,
cycling or
cycling?
Cycling data, yeah, that's verified.
And,
so basic,
and also, since I've got you, is the collision data verified too?
So the collision data, it's complicated, but recent data is provisional. Right. Yeah. So that is subject to change. So that can go. That can go up, that can go down, there can be changes, but we've done this process across London on all of the schemes that have been put in as part of the Mayor's response to the pandemic, and we've used exactly the same process using provisional data where verified data isn't available, and that I think is a robust methodology. That's very clear, thank you. I just apologise, Councillor Foote, and to yourself. You asked me a question, then I jump all over the place and throw lots of other things in, but my bottom line is that I'm not sitting here saying pull it out and get rid of it. I'm saying extend that experimental period so we have a bit more information, more data. We're hearing stuff tonight that we've not heard before, and I want Cabinet to be confident when they make a call.
Councillor Biddulph, please.
Thanks. I've got a couple of questions, actually. First of all, I'd like to
Can you just leave it as one, please, because we're running out of time.
But I was interrupted several times.
Just one question, please.
Okay. Well, then I won't ask if you've got any data on incidents with cyclists and pedestrians, and I've got some words that I'd like to read out as Catherine Dunn did. I'd like to ask Peter, please, as a former leader of the council, When you read the point that the council was open to a legal challenge, what did you think?
You're right. That was in the report, and obviously that would get alarm bells ringing. Obviously, we've had representation from, as you mentioned earlier, several local groups that work with those who are, visually impaired and blind. I thought the wording within the report was a bit disingenuous. That it is designed in accordance to national guidelines and we develop with relevant stakeholders. Well, just because relevant stakeholders are involved in the consultation doesn't mean, as you said, they're particularly happy with what has been put forward. I believe I'm right in saying there is a Transport for London review of those floating bus stops. There's been a lot of information that's been provided to Parliament about why they are of a serious concern. And I think at the time we put the documentation together, that's what we were particularly focusing on, was that legal challenge in terms of those people with that protected characteristic. Again, having a bit more homework on me, given we have that statutory duty also to promote safety on our roads and our pavements. Again, if there is some doubt about the data, we've heard the other arguments over there, but if there's doubt about the safety, I think council has to be totally convinced. Obviously, Councillor Dunn's mentioned very clearly that she's happy with what's been put before her. I think it's down to colleagues on this table to be equally convinced that the data is robust and we're not open to legal challenge. And when God forbid anything awful were to happen, we are hand on heart say, well, we did everything we did, we ticked all the boxes, we went further than that, and we were happy
Thank
with
you.
what we put in
Thank
place was thorough and robust.
Councillor Perisotto, please.
On the topic of risk assessments and legal challenges, of course, barring something really bad happening, how much can we continue adapting if it is made permanent, and what any adaptations can they be made?
Once the law is that a traffic order, experimental traffic order under sections 9 and 10 of the Road Traffic Regulation Act 1984, an experimental traffic order has to be made permanent after 18 months, or has to be removed. But once it's made permanent, of course, we can always make amendments to it in future if necessary. And the cabinet report, which is approved, also highlights some future improvements that we intend to take forward.
Point of
Thank you for that.
information for clarification, please.
Councillor Biddulph.
We do have the option, I think, to apply to the High Court for an extension. Is that what you said? That is an option if we need to. If we are so worried about the legal challenge,
There's no option.
we can go to. I'm asking a transport officer.
That's extremely unlikely to be granted, and we will not be doing that.
But we have the right to ask. It might not be granted. We can't anticipate what the court might say, but we do have the right to go to the High Court and apply.
It might be deemed to be frivolous.
Well, it might be, and it might not, because we're talking about a legal challenge here about death ultimately and human rights challenges. Can I just also clarify one point? The scheme that you're bringing in, particularly from Duke Road, and it is important to know this. I'm sorry that other colleagues are finding it taxing listening to
No,
somebody.
Councillor Biddulph, we must stick with the
Yes,
call-in, and we have time.
We are, yes,
So I'm
indeed.
not-
So
I'm
this
not
is
going
what you're
through
actually
other
bringing in
parts.
is CS9 now. The changes, particularly between Duke Road, but there are also changes in Homefields Ward. You're bringing in CS9, which was a scheme that was consulted on in 2017, which is 6 years ago, and quite a lot. We've learned quite a lot since then. I'm very concerned that we're bringing, and particularly at the Heathrow junction with Heathfield Terrace and Chiswick High Road. I think that's a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And I think I've written down death trap here. I think there's a real risk that this junction that you're implementing here is going to be a problem for the council in terms of legal challenge.
Can I just say something? So we are sort of running out of time, and I do need to reframe subcommittee members as well, just to keep them very, very short. I just wanted to ask sort of a question from to Councillor Thompson, and you've got all the figures here as well. Do you actually believe that there's more safety over the period of 3 or 4 years up to now?
I'm as you mentioned earlier, it's interpretation, which bits of information you look at. But as I look at information and I look at collision maps and all the rest of it, I can't but help draw my personal layperson's conclusion that when that cycle lane is up and running, the accident rates increase, and that surely is of concern. Obviously, you've heard a counter argument tonight. Ultimately, you have to make a call on that one.
Just to address the safety point, every scheme that's built on the highway will be subject to a road safety audit. And the whole point of a road safety audit, which is done independently of the designers of the scheme, is to ensure that the fresh pair of eyes is looking at the scheme and determining whether it is safe or not.
I don't understand when that would be implemented, because we're looking at the scheme now that you want to implement, and it's a 2017 scheme, and there's been a lot of lived experience since then. We know what happens. We know what's happening in terms of interactions between cyclists and pedestrians, which I think means crashes between the two of them. We know that takes place. We know that this is an out-of-date scheme, and I would have thought it was right to look at the 2017 scheme afresh, not afterwards, but before.
Can I just ask, John, do you actually have any collision data with cyclists and pedestrians?
Just bear with me while I find it. From memory, there's been one pedestrian and cycle collision during the study period, so that's from 2018 to the current time, and that was during a construction period. I'm not aware of any other pedestrian and cycle collisions.
Thank you.
And can I just say that I've got people in my ward who have crashed into cyclists and have now they're in pain, they're paying for physiotherapy, and they're fearful about going out. So what the problem is here, Chairman, is that there's no method for collecting data between, interactions as they're called, between cyclists and pedestrians. Nobody knows where to go to record that information. That needs to be looked at.
It may well need to be looked at, but ultimately we have to use the data sets that we have. The collision data set is managed by the police and the government, not by Transport for London. It's very, very robust, excepting it might miss near misses, but it's very robust. It's established for using for highway design schemes, and I think it's the right approach. You know, we do near miss studies as well as part of developing projects, and we've got a good amount of information for that. But ultimately, we have to look at the data that police give us.
Thank you.
And Chair, with permission, if I just to reassure Councillor Bidoff and also to reassure residents as well, every scheme we design, road safety audit goes through, there are 4 stages to it. One is done during the design stage, one is done during the pre-construction stage, post-construction stage, and one is done pre-construction and post-construction road safety audits. So along all these periods, and again, once the scheme is finished, a year later, there's a stage 4 road safety audit. So at all these points, if a scheme is inherently or the design is inherently unsafe, it will be picked up and addressed. That's the whole purpose of it.
Thank you for that. We now move on to the first main part of our responsibility tonight, which is to see how much we agree with the calling request. May I remind you that this can be in whole, in part, or not at all. I will therefore ask one by one to express your view on that and explain your thinking. If you agree with the call in part, you will need to clarify which parts and give evidence to support your position. I also ask you to bear in mind the reasons in the constitution that I listed earlier and which are included in the procedure note provided to you. Each member will have 5 minutes. So if I can just start with Councillor Perisotto, please.
Thank you very much. I do not agree with the call-in. I am satisfied with the information that I have received from the transport officer and cabinet member with regards to safety, with the purpose, with the consultation, and potential legal risks as well, and legal challenges. Thank you.
Councillor Sharma, please.
Thank you, Chair. I also do not agree with the call-in, and I'm satisfied with Councillor Dunn's explanation, Jefferson's, and also TfL representative with regards to everything discussed this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Biddulph, please.
I do agree with the call-in. I don't think we've had answers or indeed time to discuss the issues, and some of them are extremely serious. And I think we should have had more time to do this. On safety, I'm not convinced at all. The stories that I have within my ward of people who've had incidents and don't report them, and particularly pedestrians and cyclists, there's just no data about that at all, and there's no way of people recording it. In terms of cycle usage, I think we need another count. I haven't been persuaded about that. I know from sitting on buses that the journey times are much longer than they were before, and that the frustration levels are enormously high about the impacts that has on people's lives. I don't think it's proportionate to the desired outcome either. The very few number of people who are cycling as a result of this, I'm not saying rip it out, and same as Peter, but I think it's absolutely not clear that it's the right scheme in the right place. And I am very concerned indeed that we will be signing up as a council to potentially being taken to court on a human rights challenge and perhaps for corporate manslaughter. It isn't safe. I'm really worried about the Heathfield Terrace. Well, you can laugh, Councillor Dunn.
But there's no mention of corporate manslaughter. That's not what
whatever it is.
That's not what it's about.
If an old person is killed,
that is not mentioned in the report anywhere. This is just
it's a human rights challenge and equalities challenge. There are risks here to older people. There are risks here to older people.
You agree to it. Thank you. That's
well. There are risks to older people and to blind people at bus stops. Yes, but I think they are extreme. The bus stop bypasses we haven't discussed to any extent at all. And I know from the National Federation of the Blind in the UK, we've had representations from it today as councillors on the panel about how much these bus stops affect their daily lives, and they have protected characteristics. They have protected characteristics.
Councillor Richard Foote, please.
Thank you, Chair. Frankly, I've heard a lot of opinions, but very little fact to back up all of these things, and I shall be voting accordingly.
Sorry, Councillor Foote, do you agree with the calling or?
No, sorry, against. I will be against the calling.
Thank you, councillors.
Sorry, Councillor, but could you just explain just kind of why that is?
He did.
I did. I said I've heard a lot of opinions.
Okay.
Very little fact to back it up.
Okay. I think. Only agree.
So he's talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Conflicting opinions. Maybe you mean conflicting opinions.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. As I stated earlier, I will now briefly sum up what we have said to see if we have any partial or whole consensus. I'll also be proposed a motion based on that, confirming if the subcommittee wishes to agree with all the calling requests, part of the calling requests, and if so, which elements or none of the request. I will therefore ask you one by one to express on what recommendations you wish to see. Cool. Hear me? Sorry, point of reference. Okay, so we've got committee panel members. So we have a motion here. So I do need to have a seconder. So with the subcommittee members that do not agree with the calling, do I have a seconder? Thank you. And then we do need to go to a voting process with this. So again, if I could just have hands up for the council subcommittee members who will not want the calling.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just confused about when we get to 1, 2, and 3.
Do you want me to go through? Okay, so putting to the vote that the challenge to the decision should be taken no further, meaning that the decision may be implemented. All in favour? Yeah, sure. So that the challenge to the decision should be taken no further, meaning that the decision may be implemented. So this is, of course, due to the call-in and a committee cabinet meeting. Yeah, that's passed. So, sorry, so the question is, are you against the motion or with the motion? Yeah. Yeah. Against the decision. Yeah.
I'm against the decision being implemented.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so regards to the call-in then. So we have 4 subcommittee members against the call-in and 1 for the call-in. So the call-in is dropped. We move on to agenda item number 3. Any other matters that the chair considers urgent? There are no urgent matters. As such, I would like to thank everyone for being present at this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Call-in Subcommittee. And with that, I close the meeting.
You don't need to worry about that. I was watching it. There's only if like those